So today I wanted to talk about A Soul of Ash and Blood, just kind of a singular review on a series that I have loved for a very, very long time. To give some context, I started reading From Blood and Ash a few years ago. It was before it had come to the main publisher, but still when there was some buzz around it. And I wanted to kind of speak through my thoughts because most of the series I have given between 4 to 5 stars. I've generally loved the series as it's been published, but I do feel that this book in particular didn't work for me for a number of reasons, and I haven't really heard anything about it, so I thought it warranted at least putting out there what didn't work for me and what I'm hoping to see in the future. So this book is essentially Castiel's perspective from Blood and Ash, the first book, and the now 4 or 4.5 book series. We've come a long way from book 1, so there were certain aspects of revisiting the initial story that I did find comforting and fascinating. We progress a little bit, that's why I call it 4.5, because there is a little bit of progression within the story of where we left off. I don't want to get too much into that in case you're still in the middle of the series, but where we leave off in book 4 is kind of like a climax of everything that's going on. There's a lot of moving pieces, and that does progress a little bit. And by a little bit, I want to say maybe 40 to 60 pages. And then it is a flashback sort of system where Castiel is walking us through his perspective of everything that happened in book 1. And this works and doesn't work for me. What I found interesting about this was before Castiel even gets to the castle and is introduced as Hawk, that was his name, and is introduced as Hawk, we get to see how he gets there, how he maneuvers, what he does. We get to see more of him and Kieran's friendship before Poppy came into the picture, and there's a lot of it that I really did enjoy. But where that ended was specifically when Castiel and Poppy's timeline comes together. A lot of what we visit in this book is just Castiel's perspective of events we've already lived through Poppy, who I do find to be a more interesting narrator, albeit a slightly less objective narrator, but I found that's what made her perspective really interesting. So I found it a little bit disappointing when so much of the story was a lot of him and Poppy together, which is the story we've already seen. I feel like there could have been so much more time spent on Castiel getting to the city, how he wound up in this circumstance. We could have seen him many years before and a more dark past that we know has led him to make some more tough decisions. I feel like there was so much more opportunity to get a greater and a better history of Castiel that I do feel ultimately was wasted and this story and kind of just thrown aside for the greater, what I would say is kind of fan-touting romance. And though I do love the romance, it is definitely what initially hooked me into the series, I do feel now that we have sacrificed storytelling for the sake of kind of like the fae romance that takes oh my god, I'm mixing up my fantasy smut, for the romance that is prevalent in this story, and I found that to be just a little bit disappointing. I do tend to mediate my expectations for fantasy romance, whether that's a good or a bad thing. It is what I do. I don't necessarily go in with the same storytelling, plot, and character expectations that I would with Robin Hobb to a Armin Trout book. I know what I'm going in for. I'm going in for a good time. And even with those expectations, I feel that they were sacrificed in this story. I started to feel that way a little bit in the prequel, where I found a lot of the characters were similar. A lot of the storyline was almost the exact same storyline, if not inverted a little bit. And it was a little bit disappointing to have my already managed expectations not quite met. That being said, I will say the progression in the story, those 40 to 50 pages, I did really like. I am still going to pick up the next book, but I think this has led me to be a little more trepidatious and a little more cautious to pick up anything from the prequel series, Flesh and Fire, I believe it's called, the Flesh and Fire prequel series. And I do think after I finish the Blood and Ash series, whether I continue with Flesh and Fire, I don't think I'm going to be picking up the newest series for Jennifer L. Armentrout. And I can already feel this is going to be the more unpopular opinion on this series, but I do think just my disappointment was so much with this book, and I don't know if this is why people aren't talking about it, but I think for the first time in the history of my channel, because I do go into these books with a certain, I'm looking for a certain something in it, and that it makes it pretty easy to rate them 4 and 5 stars. But for the first time in the history of my channel, I'm going to be rating this book a 2-star book. I don't even think I would really recommend it for the die-hard fans that tend to solely read fantasy romance when they pick up fantasy. Maybe this is something you would enjoy, but if you're anything out of that scope, I don't think this is going to itch the romantic bone in your body. I don't think it's going to itch the fantasy bone in your body. I think it fell short of most of what it was trying to do, and it honestly just felt also bloated for what it was. For what we visited, where we visited, and as much as we learned about Castile in this book, I did not feel it maybe delivered what it was trying to. And that's really sad because I have been such a supporter of this series and I have loved it for so long. But like I said, I will pick up the next book. I'm excited for the next book, but I'm just not interested in what seems to now be a trend. I believe it happened with E.L. James. Haven't read the 50 Shades series, but I did work in a bookstore. I know it happened with Stephanie Meyers, and now it's happening here. Basically, the retelling of a romance or a fantasy romance in the perspective of the opposite character. And I do just think that that is more a writing exercise than a fully republished full price novel. I think that's something that you can release, maybe a web series, or release it in a book for sure, because there is going to be an audience for that. But is it worth, I'm in Canada, so the $25 sticker price that is on it, I'm not too sure that it is, because we learned so little, and it genuinely, by the end of the book, did just feel like a character development writing exercise that we used to do in our English literature classes. So it's a bit of a brutal review, and I wish I had more positive things to say about it, but all in all, it was a disappointment. I will say, my boyfriend picked this up for me. I was having a really rough day at work, and he showed up with fantasy smut and chocolate. What more can you ask for? So in that sense, I suppose it did deliver. I was late getting my hands on it anyways. I pre-ordered it and then it got canceled for some reason, and then I just didn't find the time to go to the bookstore to pick it up. So, you know, in that sense, it came to me at the perfect time, and the little progression of the story was just what I needed. But it's a little disappointing, and I really am crossing my fingers and hope that the next book really delivers, because I love this series so much. But now I'm kind of just left wondering if it overstayed its welcome a little bit. I'll be interested to see what everyone thinks about this. I haven't even looked on Goodreads. I haven't looked at any reviews. I just read this, formed my own opinions, but I am going to be interested to see, is it going to just be 5-star ratings and then 2-star ratings? Is anyone going to fall into the middle? Because I'd be interested to see what that customer base looks like and what they would have gotten out of it. I am a super fan for some authors, but I guess Armentrout just isn't one. So I can understand objectively what a die-hard fan might get out of this. But that being said, that's all I really have in terms of A Soul of Ash and Blood book review. And thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video.